opportunity of listening to your staff and looking at your data and understanding your business in a new way, you have the ability to make decisions where you're mitigating against risk by looking at history, looking at your past, and looking at the insights coming from your own staff, telling you, hey, this is a real thing. You know, it might be a competitor that they see on the horizon that you don't see yet. And, you know, you hear about disruption. That's essentially what that is just a competitor that's found a better way of doing the same business or a new approach to doing the same market, but it might not be the same business. And it ends up disrupting large organizations that might have thought of themselves as completely safe. You know, you hear about Blockbuster Video and Kodak and companies like that. It's not just an anecdote. These are huge companies that are getting disrupted in massive ways. And I read a stat fairly recently that the majority of the Fortune 500, so more than 50% of the Fortune 500 companies in the last 20 years, half of them have disappeared. And it's amazing when you actually look at the numbers and look at the company names and you're like, yeah, Xerox is not the same company they used to be. And, you know, IBM even, you know, they are not the company they were. I grew up in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley. I know exactly who IBM was, and they're not the company that they were at one point in time. And there's a lot of change that's taken place in business as, you know, we went through the third industrial revolution and we had computers and the change with the internet and having websites and things like that. You think about businesses today and try and imagine or try and think of a business that has not embraced those elements of the third industrial revolution. Someone that doesn't do, you know, their accounting on a computer, if they're doing it by paper, they're not scalable. They can't grow to the scale that companies need to be able to grow to. Or maybe they don't use computers at all, or maybe they've rejected, you know, having email, or for that matter, they could reject using the telephone. And a business is not going to survive, you know, if they reject the changes that happen in an industrial revolution.
Let me throw this question here at you, Brett. Okay, so I know many companies rejected remote work before. Okay, yeah. I was lucky. I was so lucky in early 2000s when IBM made this leap and it allowed to find the best talent across the country and the world. Okay, so we were able to work remotely successfully. I am big proponent for that. Mm-hmm. Yet so many companies were really under impression that no, this is for security reasons, for whatever. It's easy for managers to see their employees day to day, number of reasons, right? So how do you think this is changing now?
Well, obviously with COVID, there's a massive shift and companies are stepping back and saying, wow, this isn't as bad as we thought it would be. You know, if they haven't explored allowing remote work, it's just been a fear factor for them. And you can't make decisions in business based on fear. A perfect example of a fear-based decision, if you remember back many, many years ago, the Sony Walkman was the thing to have at one point in time in the 80s. The cassette deck that, you know, had the headphones, and everybody had to have those. You know, I was in high school when that was happening. And so, you know, if you didn't have a Walkman, you weren't cool. And so it was more than just a piece of equipment. It was a fashion accessory. It was everything. Sony actually came up with the concept for an MP3 player that basically was exactly like the Walkman, but it was basically what an iPod would be. And they chose not to release it because they were afraid that they would disrupt their own market that they had. They had 100% ownership of the market. Yeah, there was other companies that sold cassette decks and things, but they were the Walkman. You know, they were branded and everybody had to have one. And so they chose not to do a digital Walkman. And Apple came along and ultimately disrupted that entire market. And, you know, obviously Apple wasn't worried about what would happen to Sony. Sony was worried. And so they didn't do something, and they avoided it because of their own fear of disrupting their own market.
You know, this is so funny, Brett, that you bring up this example. I'm thinking that Sony was thinking about the next horse.
Yes.
Okay? While Steve Jobs did something different. All right. So yeah, exactly. Fantastic example. Yeah.
Now it's funny too, because, you know, not to heap praise on Apple for this, but in the same example, Apple disrupted the iPod when they released the iPhone.
Yeah.
They pretty much made the iPod kind of non-existent. It exists today, obviously, but you don't have to have it like you did when they first came out. And now the phone itself has all the functionality of the iPod. Apple knew that releasing the iPhone was going to pretty much kill the market for the iPod, but they knew that that's what was needed. They knew that it was a choice that needed to be made. And yeah, holding back out of fear is a losing game. So that's part of why all these elements are so important. And when you have companies that have staff members that are saying, hey, I would be more effective if I could work from home, or, people that in Silicon Valley where they commute for 2 hours each way because they can't afford to live in the Bay Area, those people are exhausted when they get to work. And frankly, they would love to be able to work from home, and they would be more productive if they did. And so some of the companies that have been holding off on this for years, for political reasons or just personal choice, they kind of were forced to move into it all of a sudden. And the stakes were high because if they didn't make it so that their employees could work from home, they basically had no way to have their employees work. With COVID, you couldn't obviously have people in the office, and those examples became very publicly known when it happened. And so it was a PR nightmare as well as a physical danger for all the staff members. And then people were quitting, and it was a business nightmare. And these are the same exact things that people talking about digital transformation have been kind of warning about for years. It's not about COVID, it's about change in business. And COVID in this case was the catalyst that forced that change.